You wake up on a Saturday morning. Your salary arrives while you're still asleep. You tap your phone, buy coffee, order lunch, pay your rent, and maybe invest a little money into a company whose headquarters you've never seen. Not a single coin changes hands. Nothing physical moves. Numbers simply appear, disappear, and somehow everyone agrees that your day has been productive. Money is so ordinary that it's almost invisible. But stop for a second. Imagine trying to explain money to someone from 20,000 years ago. You tell him this little rectangle of paper can buy a cow. He laughs. You tell him a shiny metal disc can feed his family for a week. He laughs harder. Then you tell him that one day, people won't even use the paper anymore. They'll stare at glowing glass rectangles, press a button, and thousands of dollars will move across continents without anyone touching anything. At that point, he'd probably assume you've eaten the wrong mushrooms, because money is one of the strangest inventions our species has ever created. A lion understands meat. A beaver understands wood. A spider understands webs. Only humans can look at something that has almost no practical value and collectively decide that it represents food, houses, ships, kingdoms, even entire civilizations. Money isn't food. You can't breathe it. You can't wear it. You can't survive by eating gold. And yet, nearly every decision in the modern world revolves around it. How did that happen? Who was the first human to look at an object and say, "This isn't useful"? But if everyone believes it's useful, then it becomes useful. Because here's the twist. Nobody actually invented money, at least not intentionally. Money was never somebody's brilliant idea. It emerged because civilization kept running into the same frustrating problem over and over and over again. Let's go back, way back, long before cities, long before kings, long before writing, long before history itself. Imagine waking up 12,000 years ago. You don't have a wallet, you don't have a bank account, you don't have debt. You don't even have the concept of buying something. Your family hunts deer, another family gathers berries, someone else knows how to shape beautiful stone axes. Another group makes woven baskets. Everyone has something. Everyone needs something. Life seems wonderfully simple until you actually try to trade. Let's say your stone axe breaks. You need a new one. So you walk over to the village's best toolmaker carrying 2 freshly hunted rabbits. The toolmaker looks at the rabbits, looks back at you, and shrugs. "I don't need rabbits. His family already ate. He wants animal skins. Now you need to find somebody with skins." But that person doesn't want rabbits either. She wants dried fish. So now you're looking for a fisherman. Except the fisherman already has plenty of fish because, well, he's a fisherman. He wants berries. Now you're looking for someone collecting berries. Before long, you've spent half your day trying to complete what should have been one simple trade. Modern economists have a wonderfully boring name for this problem: the double coincidence of wants. Both people must want exactly what the other person has, at exactly the same moment. That sounds manageable inside a tiny family. It becomes a nightmare once hundreds of people begin specializing, because specialization is one of humanity's greatest inventions. When one person spends years making better tools, another becomes a better hunter. Another becomes a better potter. Another discovers better ways to weave baskets. Society becomes more productive. Ironically, trade becomes less convenient. Every improvement creates another dependency. Every dependency creates another negotiation. Civilization was becoming smarter, but economically, it was becoming slower. Now here's something interesting. For a long time, this wasn't actually a serious problem. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer societies have repeatedly found that many groups barely used barter at all inside their own communities. If you killed a large antelope, you didn't sell it. You shared it. Not because everyone was unusually generous, because sharing was insurance. Today you're successful. Tomorrow, you might return empty-handed. If everyone keeps score too carefully, the unlucky starve. If everyone shares, everyone survives. The Hadza of Tanzania still practice versions of this today. The Jew, Hoansi of southern Africa have long traditions of food sharing that spread risk across the entire group. Human cooperation didn't begin with money. It began with trust. Your wealth wasn't measured by what you owned. It was measured by how many people would feed you when you failed. That might sound idealistic. It wasn't. It was mathematics. Nobody hunted successfully every day. Some days you found nothing. Some weeks were disasters. Without sharing, entire families disappeared. Reciprocity was evolution's original insurance policy. But eventually, everything changed. Around 12,000 years ago, in several places across the world, humans stopped wandering. Not completely, but enough. Agriculture began appearing independently in regions like the Fertile Crescent, China, Mesoamerica, New Guinea, and later elsewhere. Instead of chasing food, people started growing it. This seems like an obvious improvement. Plant crops, harvest food, problem solved. Except agriculture created problems nobody had ever faced before. The first was surplus. Hunter-gatherers couldn't easily accumulate enormous amounts of food. Meat spoiled, fruit rotted, people moved constantly. Storage was limited, farmers were different, grain could be stored. Lots of it. Suddenly families owned hundreds, sometimes thousands, of kilograms of wheat or barley. For the first time in history, wealth could sit still. And when wealth sits still, someone has to protect it. Someone has to count it. Someone has to organize it. Villages became towns. Towns became cities. Cities created governments. Governments demanded taxes. Now, imagine trying to collect taxes without numbers, without writing, without accounting, without money. Chaos. Fortunately, humans solved one problem by accidentally inventing another technology: writing. Most people think writing was invented so poets could write stories. Not even close. The oldest writing we have wasn't literature. It wasn't philosophy. It wasn't religion. It was accounting. Some of humanity's oldest written tablets from Mesopotamia don't describe heroes or kings. They describe sheep, barley, beer, oil, taxes, payments, receipts. Essentially, the world's first spreadsheets. The Sumerians, living between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers roughly 5,000 years ago, had created cities unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Tens of thousands of people, temples, warehouses, markets, workers, farmers, merchants, administrators. Suddenly, nobody could personally know everyone anymore. Trust between neighbors no longer scaled. Records had to replace memory. Imagine running a city where thousands of workers deliver grain every harvest season. Who delivered what? Who owes taxes? Who already paid? Who borrowed seed last spring? Who still owes the temple 20 sacks of barley? You can't remember all of that. So someone presses wedge-shaped symbols into wet clay. Writing wasn't born from storytelling. It was born from bookkeeping. Civilization literally learned to write because accounting became too complicated. That's an extraordinary thought. One of humanity's greatest intellectual revolutions started because somebody needed to count grain more efficiently. And grain itself would soon become something much stranger. Not just food, money. Because barley had an incredible advantage. Everyone needed it. Everyone recognized it. Everyone could measure it. Workers in ancient Mesopotamia were often paid in barley rations. Temples stored mountains of grain inside enormous granaries. Taxes were frequently collected in grain. Debts could be calculated in grain. Contracts referenced grain. Barley had quietly become a universal language of value. It wasn't money in the modern sense. You couldn't fold it into your pocket. You certainly couldn't carry 6 months' salary on your belt. But for the first time, an entire civilization had agreed that one particular commodity could measure almost everything else. If your labor equals 30 liters of barley, then a goat might equal 300, a clay pot might equal 20, a bronze knife perhaps 60. Everything suddenly had a common denominator. Prices had been born, but grain had one very annoying flaw. It rotted. Mice loved it. Moisture destroyed it. And carrying hundreds of kilograms across long trade routes was about as enjoyable as carrying a refrigerator through the desert. Civilization needed something better, something smaller, something rarer, something that didn't decay, something almost magical. And that something was already hiding beneath their feet. Silver. Not as jewelry, not yet as coins, simply as weighed metal. That's where the next chapter of money truly begins. Silver solved one problem, coins solved another, Paper solved another, banks solved another, and every single solution created an even bigger question. Because eventually people noticed something strange. The value had never really been inside the object. Not the barley, not the silver, not even the gold. The value was somewhere else entirely. It existed, inside people's minds. Let's go back for one last time. Imagine you're a merchant in medieval Italy around the 13th century. You've spent years building your business. Your ships travel between Venice, Constantinople, Alexandria, and cities across Europe. You're successful, very successful. There's just one problem. You're carrying thousands of gold coins. Gold is wonderful, until somebody tries to steal it. A merchant traveling across Europe wasn't just transporting wealth, he was advertising it. Every highway robber knew exactly what was inside those heavy chests. The richer you became, the more dangerous your success became. So merchants began doing something surprisingly clever. Instead of carrying the gold, they left it somewhere safe. Early banking families accepted deposits. You handed over your gold. They handed you a written receipt. That receipt simply said, "We owe this person this amount of gold." At first, people returned to collect their coins. But after a while, something fascinating happened. Imagine you owe another merchant 100 gold coins. Instead of withdrawing your gold, you simply hand him the receipt. Now he owns the claim. The gold never moved. Only the paper did. For the first time, money had become information. Not metal, not food, information. Banks quietly discovered something else. Almost nobody came back for all of their gold at the same time. Most deposits simply sat in vaults, day after day, month after month, year after year. So the bankers asked themselves a dangerous question. If 1,000 people deposited gold, and only 100 usually came to withdraw it, what happens if we lend the rest? That idea changed civilization forever. The same pile of gold could now finance farms, ships, bridges, businesses, entire kingdoms. Money had stopped being something you stored. It became something that moved, something that multiplied, something that built the modern world. Of course, this only worked as long as people believed the bank could return their money. Again, trust. Always trust. Centuries passed. Paper became normal. Governments printed banknotes. Central banks appeared. National currencies emerged. Then came another revolution, one that happened so quietly most people barely noticed. The gold disappeared. For much of history, many currencies were tied to precious metals. In theory, your paper could always be exchanged for gold. Then, gradually, countries abandoned that system. Today, if you look inside a $100 bill, you won't find hidden gold. There isn't a vault somewhere containing one specific gold bar waiting for you. The value exists because society collectively agrees it exists. That's it. A modern banknote is essentially a promise backed by governments, economies, laws, and perhaps most importantly, shared belief. The same thing happened again with credit cards, then debit cards, then online banking, then smartphones. Today, millions of people go weeks, sometimes months, without touching physical cash. Their salaries arrive digitally, their shopping happens digitally, their investments exist digitally, their savings exist as numbers inside computers. The strange thing is, almost nobody finds that strange anymore. Because once enough people trust a system, the physical object becomes almost irrelevant. Then, in 2009, another experiment began. Bitcoin. Whether it ultimately succeeds or fails isn't the interesting part here. The fascinating part is why it appeared. For thousands of years, people trusted kings. Then governments, then banks. Bitcoin asked a completely different question. What if we trusted mathematics instead? For the first time, people attempted to create money whose trust came not from rulers, not from armies, not from central banks, but from cryptography and distributed computers, whether one agrees with the idea or not. It represents the newest chapter in the oldest story humanity has ever been telling, the story of trust. Because every form of money, from barley to silver to coins to paper to digital numbers to solves exactly the same problem. How do complete strangers cooperate? Think about what happens every morning. You buy bread from someone you've never met. The baker buys flour from someone else. The miller buys wheat from a farmer. The farmer buys fuel. The fuel company buys steel. The steel company buys machines. Millions of strangers cooperate every day without knowing one another, without sharing language, religion, culture, or history. Money makes this possible, not because the paper itself has power, but because everyone believes everyone else will accept it tomorrow. That's the miracle. Anthropologist Yuval Noah Harari once described money as perhaps the most universal system of mutual trust ever created. And, whether you agree with every one of his ideas or not, on this point, history makes a compelling case. Money is one of the few stories believed simultaneously by billions of people who will never meet. That's extraordinary. If aliens arrived tomorrow and asked humanity, "What is money?" they probably wouldn't understand the answer. It's paper. No. Sometimes it's gold. Not really. It's numbers. Often it's trust. Yes, that last answer gets closer than any other. Because if tomorrow every human being suddenly decided that a certain object had value, it would become valuable. And if tomorrow everyone stopped believing in money, every bank account on Earth would become meaningless overnight. Civilization doesn't run on metal. It doesn't run on paper. It doesn't even run on computers. It runs on shared belief. Which brings us back to that first farmer standing in a village 10,000 years ago. He wasn't trying to invent economics. He wasn't trying to build capitalism. He wasn't thinking about global markets, inflation, stock exchanges, cryptocurrency, or central banking. He just wanted an easier way to trade, a simpler way to exchange what he had for what he needed. One small solution to one small inconvenience. But history has a habit of taking ordinary ideas and letting them grow into extraordinary ones. The first sack of barley measured value. The first silver weighed trust. The first coin carried a government's promise. The first banknote carried a bank's promise. Today's digital balance carries society's promise. Different tools. The same idea. For thousands of years, we've told ourselves that money is wealth. But that's backwards. Money isn't wealth. Money is the language we invented to describe wealth. Just as words aren't the objects they describe, money isn't the food in the house, the land, or the labor. It's the story that allows billions of strangers to exchange all of those things peacefully. Perhaps that's the strangest part of all. The greatest invention behind money wasn't gold. It wasn't silver. It wasn't paper. It wasn't mathematics. It was imagination. The uniquely human ability to convince millions, then billions, of complete strangers to believe in exactly the same invisible idea. Every coin you've ever held, every paycheck you've ever received, every number sitting quietly inside your bank account, they're all descendants of a conversation that began thousands of years ago. When one human looked at another and silently agreed, "I'll accept this today because I trust someone else will accept it tomorrow." Civilizations rose because of that sentence. Empires fell because people stopped believing it. Markets crash when trust disappears. Economies grow when trust expands. The object changes. The promise remains. Money was never humanity's greatest treasure. Trust was. Money was simply the way we learned to carry it.